you've spoken to some of the world's biggest streamers, people like Pokimane and XQC and Asmongold, Moist Critical, etc., Ludwig as well. What are some of the lessons that you've learned from speaking to people who are the most online? They've won being online. They're the most online people on the planet. What have you learned from speaking to them?
Wow. So a couple of different things. The first is it's not nearly as fun or easy as they make it look. So oftentimes, and I've worked with a lot of people. So, was in Boston for a while and working with people out of startups and stuff out of MIT and Harvard and just really, really hardworking people. I've worked with people at like Goldman Sachs and Google and whatnot. And like, there are a lot of people who work really hard. I don't think people really appreciate how hard the people who are at the top are. And I don't think people really appreciate the balance of skills that's necessary to achieve that. So it's some amount of spontaneity and being able to have fun on command. So these are people who are in the business of friendship. And I think the biggest thing that people don't understand is the level of sacrifice it takes to get there. So what we see is someone who's huge and recognized and has all these sponsorship deals and presumably has all this money and things like that. But the levels of sacrifice, because what they really have to do is sacrifice just about every dimension of their life. So what we sort of think about, even when I compare them to bankers, is like bankers get to go to work and have their professional relationships, and they get to go home and they get to have their friends. But what we really see with streamers is they sacrifice on every dimension. So your friends will invite you or not invite you depending on what the collab will get them. Right? And then if you turn something, so like even friendship becomes a part of your job. Like the other thing that I think people don't really appreciate is that the human brain is not designed to deal with criticism from millions of people. So if we think about like tribal structures, if I grew up in a tribe of 300 people, how often am I going to get criticized? And we have these different biases that people don't really think about, which is that even if 99 people tell me that they like me, if one person tells me that they don't like me, that's the thing that my mind is going to clue in on. So now you take these people who get millions of points of feedback and their brain is literally designed. And I've seen this as a streamer myself, where I can see tons of messages scrolling past faster than I can read them, but my brain can pick out the one thing that is actually damaging. It actually enters into my conscious thought. And this is where the brain is processing all kinds of information that we're not aware of. And so I think people don't really get how hard it is. And the beautiful thing is that the people who are successful are the ones who are able to find some kind of balance. Otherwise, you just can't sustain it. And you'll burn out and then it doesn't work. So they're amazing, resilient individuals.
It's almost like a battle of attrition in that way.
Absolutely. And most people can't make it to the finish line. It's like a marathon that never ends.
There's a quote from Jason Pargin, one of my favorites, that says, "Your heroes aren't gods. They're just regular people who probably got good at one thing by neglecting literally everything else."
Yeah, I think that's probably true. I think, but what I see at the highest levels of performance is that you usually have to be good at a lot of things and you can't neglect too much.
Because it's going to come and catch up with you eventually.
Absolutely. Your health will catch up with you, yeah.
But there's a guy in the UK who is a weightlifting coach. A powerlifting coach. Can't get that wrong. And one of my friends started working with him. He works with people for free. He's this savant programmer, unbelievably smart. But he's 78 or something, sort of old guy. And he gets unbelievable results for the athletes he works with. He doesn't charge anybody. He's already made his money. He retires. He works with people on invite only, and the programming is ruthlessly hard. What I realized was he was getting around about 2 to 2.5 years of progress within 1 year of programming. But the reason that he was doing this was because he was absolutely battering his athletes into the ground. Now, what you end up with is a scenario where the athletes who end up surviving this, who don't get injured, who don't get burned out, who don't get too tired, who don't lose passion, obviously are going to have made unbelievable progress because the programming's brutal. It's more volume, it's more frequent, it's higher weights, it's higher RPEs. And survivability bias or survivorship bias means that the only ones that do make it to the end, by virtue of the fact they've made it to the end, have unbelievable progress. What you don't get to see are the attrition rate.
Mm-hmm.
It's how many people fell away. What's your churn? How many people got injured? How many people gave up on their passion? And this is a lens. I need to come up with a name for it. I need to meme this. This is a lens through which I see a lot of very difficult pursuits. That basically it does come down to a battle of attrition. And if there is somebody that can outsuffer you, if there is someone for whom they can go 7 days without seeing sunlight, but you can only go half a day without seeing sunlight, in some regards, they have a competitive advantage.
Yeah, so I'd express a little bit of pushback on that. So I think that's a commonly accepted view, that the people who sacrifice the most get the most. But honestly, Chris, in my experience with lots of people and even myself, I did pretty well in medical school. I didn't study over 2 hours a day. I tried it for the first month where everyone else was like, we're going to go to class and we're going to stay at the library at 10 o'clock at night, 11 o'clock at night. And I was like, I just can't do that. So I studied 2 hours a day and I did fine. And I think that there's this idea that being successful requires sacrifice. But I think there's a huge selection bias there. Usually the people who are talking about the sacrifice they made to succeed are there's a selection bias there. The people who are like, yeah, it was actually pretty easy for me, you don't actually hear from them. And so there's something almost like psychological where I see that, if you succeed and you made a sacrifice, it's very psychologically difficult to swallow that you didn't need to make the sacrifice in the first place.
Wow.
It's really interesting. There's data behind this too. So the way that people value what they get correlates with the price that they pay. There's a study that was done, I don't remember exactly where, I'm slipping on the reference, but people actually asked people who joined fraternities in university, how good is your fraternity? And what a really interesting variable is that the more the fraternity demeans you, the higher the value of the fraternity. Even though by some objective measures, some people have really good connections, but one of the worst fraternities on campus, people were like, this is the best fraternity. And what was their hazing process? They stripped them down naked, tied them all to trees, and then were urinated on by other people. And when you go through that sacrifice, you can't psychologically say, yeah, I didn't get anything for that. I just sacrificed a ton for nothing and I didn't need to. But really, the work that I do with people is all about, hey, actually, you don't need to sacrifice that much. Build a healthy, balanced lifestyle. Get yourself into the flow state more often. And you can actually achieve just as much by paying half the cost.
With nowhere near as much suffering.
Absolutely.
This is a really, really important insight. I absolutely love it. I love the reframe. I love everything about this. I think as well, there is something around an incentive, or there is a disincentive for people to talk about things not being hard on the internet. First off, if it wasn't difficult, then that means that it's less of a costly signal to you. So the achievement that you have is less impressive. Secondly, there is so much more criticism on the internet for you. If it doesn't look like you had to go through things, easy for you to say, must be nice for you to say, because if somebody else does find it more difficult or can't have theory of mind to understand that it could be done just through more of a flow state or less grinding or whatever, that means that you're going to get criticized more. We'll get back to talking to Dr. K in 1 minute, but first I need to tell you about Manscaped. If you are a gentleman who needs to trim his sensitive areas and you are still using an old face shaver from 5 Christmases ago, what are you doing? Join us here in the modern world. There are purpose-built tools for the job, and the Manscaped Lawnmower 4.0 is the greatest ball and body hair trimmer ever created. It features a cutting-edge ceramic blade to reduce grooming accidents, a 90-minute battery, which allows you to take a longer shave, or if you're just a particularly hairy gentleman, waterproof technology, which allows you to groom in the shower, and an LED light, which illuminates grooming areas for a closer and more precise trim, or if you just want to do it at night, perhaps. It's also got a wireless charging system to help the battery last even longer. But best of all, you can get 20% off everything site-wide from Manscaped and free shipping if you go to manscaped.com/modernwisdom and use the code modernwisdom at checkout. That's manscaped.com/modernwisdom and modernwisdom at checkout. What's happening, people? If you enjoyed that, then press here for the full, unedited episode. And don't forget to subscribe. Peace.